We have our latest project in the garage right now. This is a 1973 Dodge Challenger. I believe it's a rally car. I'm going to double check that in the future. I know we got the rally gauges. I'll do a walk around on it and kind of show you what we got, what we plan on doing. I'm really honored to do this car. A really good friend and mentor of mine gave me the opportunity. Man, I've seen this car in the field since 2005, back when we were building, second gen Firebirds and mostly 71, 73 Mustangs, kind of flipping those. So I always thought this was a really cool car. It's really awesome to have it here in our shop and we start tearing it apart. It's a little rougher than I remember. I think it's a little rougher than the owner remembers, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to strip it down. Little video series on it. We're going to do some metal work and hopefully bring it into paint, and then the owner does most of the mechanical stuff, so he's going to bring it back and do the engine, transmission, and suspension. So right now we'll take a walk out around it. You see we're going to need a hood. What the owner took out of it, obviously it's not original. He took a 440 car out. He used to bracket race this car and drive it around on the street. So if you look right here, under the engine bay, we're obviously going to be buying a hood for it. We got tons of Bondo over here, and I've heard many stories about this car, a couple people that painted it, and you got what you paid for back then and everything else, and it lasted this long. The bad thing about this car, if you look on this side over here, I guess when the owner got it, it was in a really bad wreck. So you see it's actually, and he fixed it and he set it all lined up. But we're going to look at some frame rail repair there, some frame rail repair there. All these aprons were bent up, the radiator support. So the front of this car is going to need a lot of attention. I'm going to probably try to build a jig and just verify all these frame numbers. And more than likely, we're undecided. It's up to him to find a donor front end of this car, front suspension, or worst case scenario, we'll have to buy a frame rail, but we'll see what we come up with. If you look, I think we're going to end up putting a fender on the car. We've already talked about, just with all this work down here, it's fixable, but between that and the patching on this, it's probably easier just to spend the money on an aftermarket fender. I will say this car is going to be a driver quality car. He wants to drive it, he wants to not worry about it, but he wants it to look good from 10 feet away. So that's what we're shooting for. We're not going to go over the top like some of the other cars, but we're going to build him a really solid, respectable car that when you see this thing, you'll see it looking sharp down the road. So looking here, the good things about this car, I mean, really, the door jambs and everything are really solid. The doors itself, at least the inner structure, we're still going to have to do some work on the outer structure. They are solid. Like I said, you can see the rally dash. If you look, floor pans are junk. We're going to do full floor pans. We're going to do toe boards for sure. I think the rear seat area is in good shape. It's going to stay an automatic car. We still got to finish stripping it down. Now, right here we're talking about with this crack, and we believe that this car was bracket raced for so many years that actually the torque and everything from using this thing down the track actually cracked it in a couple spots, plus probably the excessive amounts of Bondo too. But so we're also going to do level 2, I believe it was, chassis stiffening kit. You've probably seen us do that in other cars. Actually, I never even opened this trunk, so that was luck. So trunk, actually first time I'm looking at it, I thought the trunk was in better shape. We're going to look at it. We obviously got some rust in there, and I can hear the rattling of the rusted. It needs a trunk floor pan. I did look at it from the bottom, so we already plan on putting a trunk floor pan. We're looking at trunk extensions, the drop-off extensions. I believe the wheel wells are in good shape. I haven't looked at them 100% yet. And we're looking at doing probably quarter panels as bad as the bottoms are. So that's the trunk. Also, if you know the 73s, they started doing these bumper guards, 73 and 74. He's wanting to put the 72 bumpers on him. I don't blame him, so we're going to do that. Also, obviously, since it's a 440 car, when this would not have been a 440 car back in the day, the owner is not 100% on originality. He knows what he wants. He knows what's going to make him comfortable, and he's going to build that. And I mean, you got to respect that. So if you look around this side, same thing. It's just a field fine car. It's been out for years and years. Again, the doors look pretty good, floors don't. And I guess there's only 3 rally wheels on it. I don't know where the 4th one is, but cool story. He said someone was using them off trailer for years and years. That's why the center caps are all punched out. But yeah, we're gonna finish. What we're gonna do now on this car, we're gonna finish stripping it down, get everything off, every chrome piece, every trim, every door, everything that unbolts before we cut it. And we're actually gonna probably try to put it on a rotisserie to just clean up some of the bottoms and do a closer look on it. The car's not getting sandblasted or anything. We're gonna hand strip, and since we're removing so much stuff, we'll either hand strip the panels or get the panels we're keeping down to a bare metal or close to it if the underpaint is really good. The chassis area will be all scuffed up and cleaned the best we could. And then obviously, as much as this car is being torn apart, it will be put on a frame jig, especially with the frame rail damage in the front. I'm gonna try to build a jig off another Challenger we have, actually the Challenger over there in the garage. We'll try to build a jig off that because I know that's a straight car for this car. And then we'll go ahead and start cutting and replacing these panels. So if you're into Dodge Challengers, stay tuned. We're gonna try to do the full build on this one. And I think it's gonna come out to be a pretty nice car when it's done. Stay tuned.
We skipped ahead a little bit, but everything is unbolted on this car except that upper control arm, which I need to cut off. It was stuck. But besides that, everything's unbolted. We put the lift under the Challenger and we lifted it off a little bit. And what we did, we loosened the K-member up front and the rear axle leaf springs, and we lifted it right off the suspension. When the bolts came loose, one piece. You can see it behind the car, still intact. That was a lot easier. We lifted the car up all the way, and then we got the rotisserie, which was already pretty much set up for this car, rolled up under the front, bolted to the front bumper mounts, and then once this is all set in place, we're adjusting with our lift, we'll get the center cross piece under. At this point, we'll work our way to the rear on the shackle mounts is what we're using as our location, and we're adjusting the lift up and down to get the right height and just helping it in there with a hammer once the bushings are cut, and it's pretty tight.
So we got the Challenger on the rotisserie. We had the hammer move some of the bolts and mounts around. This would actually come off a Barracuda. Usually I build the mounts for the rotisserie on the car when it's on the lift, but since I knew this one bolt up, we just had to extend the center out 2 more inches. It wasn't that big of a deal, like I said. So it's on there now. Let's get the lift finally off of here, and we'll see if we can flip it around. It should also be really close. Usually gotta play with the balance and get it centered, but since again it was on another E-body with no fenders and everything and spun fine, I think it'll spin okay here. So let's get it off the lift first. So I can't drop this lift all the way down because of the center thing, so we'll leave it right there. Unplug it. This lift is really nice. We have it just for exactly what we're doing here. You see, it's perfect for this situation. All right, so now that we got the lift out of it, let's see if she'll rotate around. Take our safety bolts out first. Put a little resistance on it. Got that one out. And we'll look at the bottom side and we'll show you how bad this car is and what we're looking at. All right, let's see if it'll rotate around. Let's go slow with it. See, that's a good sign when you can do that. I mean, it's a little off balance, but for the most part, on the rotisserie, you shouldn't be fighting it. And obviously, it still's got a lot of dirt in it. First time it's ever been upside down, sideways. So, again, it probably could be balanced off a little more, but as much as this thing's gonna be on this rotisserie, we're gonna just let it be. All right, we'll leave it right there for now. So, as you can see, right here, the frame rails both took a good hit. Man, there's bolts wrapped up in there and everything. We already know about the apron. The firewall cowls look real good. The frame structure actually from here back looks real good. Same thing with down there. I mean, it's got a little buckle right there, you could see. I'll have to tell the owner we were not aware of this. So I'll send a picture of that we might be looking at a whole frame rail on this side. I don't know. It's the owner's call. And being that he understands suspensions in these cars, I'm going to let him make this decision. Obviously, we're talking about the floor pans, full floor pans. Torsion bar looks really good here. All the under brackets look really good. We already know we're replacing the floor. And looking at the rear frame rails, they actually look really solid. What I think got this car more than anything else, and same with the rockers they look really good top and bottom. Really, this car sat in North Carolina in a field since I think it was 89 or 94 I think it was. And it basically the roots and the brush and everything grew up under here, and I think that's what got the whole bottom of the car, because really the top of it is pretty solid. So we're probably looking at quarters and most of the bottom stuff. Same thing with the trunk pan. I mean, you see we're snapping bolts off in the back end, but besides that, the frame rails do look pretty solid. The crossbar here looks good. So next step in this Challenger, now it's on here, we're going to spot sandblast it. I'm talking to the owner. I think we talked about doing that. Just taking the small sections that we know we're keeping, and we'll go over them with a dry sandblaster, mostly chassis stuff. And then we're going to go ahead and heat while we're sideways. We're keeping this part of the floor pan. We'll go ahead and get some flames on there, some heat. And actually, it's already kind of coming off, so it might not even be that hard. Actually, I might have lied. So basically, we're going to be scraping, possibly heat, taking any under chassis coating off, and basically get this thing prepped. At that point, we'll go ahead, and the next thing you should see is we're going to end up getting it on our frame jig and get it ready to be cut up. So stay tuned, more on this car to come. Thanks.
So this is the part where it starts getting real messy. To strip out this car, if you're doing it at your house or anything, there's many ways you can do it. What we're doing now is first with the wire brush on the angle grinder. We're using a couple different type of wire brushes, different angles, to really just get in there and just strip off all the dirt and grime and the stuff that's built on that's easily come off. And you could kind of already see the metal that the wire brush, I mean, as aggressive as this thing is, I mean, don't catch it in your shirt or your hand or anything, but this will really get you going, and it's good all around stripping tool to get most of the stuff off. So for the most part, I've been using this, and we're doing this before the sandblaster, because you'll see in the future my sandblaster isn't the most industrial, so we want to help it around as much as we can until then. What the wire brush won't really get off is the undercoat. This car was only undercoated on the front aprons and then the rear wheel wells. We are also going to do that. So what I'm always usually do with the undercoat is just take some heat butane torch and just you get it hot and scrape it right off, and you could see the paint right there coming right through. You're not really hurting anything. This is a pretty sturdy area. Same thing with right here. I mean, if you put a little heat on, you see it swell a little bit, but then it'll shrink back down. But you see, it just takes so much ease to getting this stuff off with just a little bit of heat, and you just scrape it, and the paint looks brand new underneath. You're not even hurting that. So I recommend doing your undercoat that way, and just obviously don't breathe any of this stuff in. We're outside in a well ventilated area. I will say the acetylene torch works a lot better in this situation. We're using butane just because I'm 5 feet short of my torch actually reaching. Moving on to exterior body panels, we're actually keeping the roof pretty much it and the deck filler panel. I'm using the Eastwood SCT with the stripping drum on it, the black stripping drum. I'm kind of going over, I went up and down initially, and now what I kind of do, I go at a slight angle to kind of just go on a different track a little bit, and you see I'm not pushing hard. It actually works better that the car's in this situation, that I'm not even using the weight of the drum, and I have better control of it. And you see every now and then I'm just feeling, making sure we're not warping anything, making sure I'm not pushing anything too hard, and the heat staying out of it. That's what you see me doing. Just take your time with this. This is a great tool to get most of the job done. After that, I'm also using a stripping disc, which is the same kind of material on the SCT drum, but what I'm doing is on the angle grinder. The drum, obviously, it has a hard time getting in a lot of these nooks and crannies and the door jamb areas, so that's where this disc on the angle grinder, you'll be able to kind of get in a lot better areas. I'm also going to go over all these areas with the sandblaster when I'm done. Same thing with the bottom, to just kind of clean everything up and just get the rest of a little bit of paint off. And that should be easy enough on my blaster that we're just, just cleaning up and just finishing the surface where these tools are doing the hard work. This is not the only way to do a car. Obviously, there's people sandblasting cars. You can do that. I think this is a less aggressive way to get a car stripped. Now, saying that, I think if you're doing a full-out show car and you want every piece of the car bare metal, every inch, removed, and no imperfections in the car, then sandblasting, dry blasting, wet blasting the chassis might be the way to go. I am not a fan of blasting exterior body panels. What I'm doing now on the inside, I did use the Eastwood stripping drum again, real lightly, same thing on the outside. And what this did, this had a bunch of rust. This whole thing was surface rusted. Some of the rust went a little bit deeper. I'm using Ospo, which is an acid, and it's going to convert the rust to more of a paintable surface. So what I'm doing a little bit. We put it on there, and you'll see later in the video, it will actually convert it and turn black. With Ospo, you have to wait 24 hours before you prime, and I know it works with most epoxy primers, but if you're using anything else, especially water-based paints, I think it doesn't work. You'll have to read the directions on that, but we're using epoxy primer, should have no problem here. Like I said, we're going to wait 24 hours. We'll go ahead and hit it with lacquer thinner, and then that should neutralize the acid. And then after that, we're going to use wax and grease remover. You'll see, I think you can maybe already kind of see it. When you put this on, you give it 10 minutes, this whole area will start turning black, and that's how you know it's working really well. Another piece of advice on the Ospo, it's acid. Don't get it on your hands and don't get it on your concrete floor. Now, we're on to the sandblaster. I'm just using a pop blaster. We're using actually a medium grit glass, crushed glass as our material. What I'm doing, I obviously have wearing the proper gear with air going into the helmet and everything. You're blasting as good as your compressor. So really, this is probably the biggest job my blaster can do for now. We're about to upgrade, but my compressor is, I think, a 28 CFM compressor, 100-gallon reserve, and this was pushing the compressor to its max with this blaster. So just FYI, you can do a whole car, but just be aware, this is the most I would do. But you can see it is working really well. I was taking breaks every 45 minutes or so.
We're getting our car ready for the epoxy primer. In summary, we used the Eastwood stripping drum. We also used the wire wheel and the stripping disc on the angle grinder. After that, we put Ospo on the rust that was really exposed after we could get the most of it off. And then I went through and I sandblasted. Also, one more thing, I also DA'd the car in the areas that we didn't sandblast, just to put a tooth in there. I still have to put wax and grease remover on this. That's what we're getting ready to do right now. We blew all the sand out. So anywhere that's sandblasted, it has a tooth and epoxy doesn't stick. But those stripping drums from the Eastwood, they get such a smooth area that you're going to have to put like an 80 grit, 120 grit, just tooth on the flat panels. Again, we didn't sandblast the the quarter panels are destroyed on this car. You can see both sides. We'll walk around the other side, just finding Bondo everywhere. So this car is going to need quarter panels. This is the time, once you're done with the sandblasting and stripping, that you should know about every panel and every piece you're going to need on the car. And this is where the plan comes up. Until this point, just prepare for the worst. They usually are. You can see under here, we also did the 80 grit. That's the Ospo. And then we're gonna wax and grease remove it, and we're also put lacquer thinner to just make sure we get the acid off. We did the toe pan we're keeping. What I did too with my sandblaster, it's not an industrial sandblaster, so what we did, we kind of just laid over this and we didn't use a ton of sand, and this is more of a surface prep area that whatever paint's on there, it's gonna stick. So we did that. We did the door jambs. I said the quarter panels are shot, so we're redoing those. And then underneath, if you look, there's still a little bit of sand off. I blew this thing for about an hour and a half. But we're gonna keep the wheel wells. There's a couple spots over here on the wheel wells. You'll see that we did blast through, but we can go ahead and repair them. They're not that big of a deal. The toe pan, we did that a little bit heavier. And then this is all we're keeping was the rocker panels and torsion bar cross member and the back frame rail. So we just did the frame rails, and everything that's sandblasted is the only stuff we're keeping on this car. Everything else for the most part is going to be replaced. Let's go around to the other side. I'll show you what we're looking at. We are keeping this the front upper control arm mount and shock mount, so that was sandblasted. We did the front. You could see the firewall did expose a couple spots over here we're going to have to repair, but all in all the firewall blasted out pretty good. Also, we tried to get as much of the seam sealer off the car. Same thing, we did blast this area after we stripped it down. It gives us a good tooth, and same thing over there. Right here you can see this quarter panel. The filler is about ½ an inch thick right here, and same thing about right here. So all this is all filler on this car. It was pointless to even try to mess with it. We did strip this area as best we can down to the quarters where we're going to cut it to save the roof. We also did the back deck filler panel, so this is going to be DA'd. It was not sandblasted. And same thing, I did the wheel wells on the inside. But yeah, that's about what we're looking at. Same thing under there. If you look on the inner firewall, we're going to have to do some rust repair on the lower cowl panel. We blasted through a bunch of stuff. Again, didn't know about that, but that's what you find when you start doing this. Over here, this is the stuff we're going to end up using right now. Usually I use a MP120, but we're going to use this Eastwood epoxy primer. I have it, someone gave it to me, and the owner wanted to use it, so we're going to use that with the activator in it. But before that, we'll go ahead and do the prep all, the wax and grease remover on the car, and then we'll get to priming. So stay tuned, and hopefully next step, we'll get this thing in primer and be protected. We're on the same day we blasted. You don't want to wait anywhere really between, get it in 72 hours, definitely, especially if you live in a humid area, or else this thing's going to start surface rusting. So this is where we're at. Stay tuned. We'll start priming this thing, and we'll take it from there.
The Eastwood direct to bare metal epoxy primer mixes on a 1-to-1 ratio for the activator and the epoxy itself. You could see right here, this is about the speed I'm going, and then we'll speed up in a second. This is a great thing to practice. Everyone knows I'm not the painter out of the group. My wife does most of the painting. So anytime I epoxy, I'm usually the one to go ahead and just hone my skills and get a little bit better. If you've never painted before, I think this is the way to go. Spray some epoxy. You could sand it up. It's easy clean up. It sprays real good. And you see, I'm kind of heavy on the gun anyway. I was only doing one coat on this car, so I meant to be a little bit heavier and just kind of make sure I get in all the areas. Come up with a system that sounds pretty obvious, but think about before you spray it. You don't want to spray yourself in a corner. You see, I worked my way right around into the trunk where we did sandblast that whole area. There's a bunch of surface rust under there. Kind of just spraying there, and then we'll go on the inside of the roof line. We worked our way, did the whole inside of the car, did the roof channel, and worked our way right around to the front. Spraying the gaps as much as possible. Anything that this does not touch is going to probably rust, and you'll have to redo again. As you can see, we're just in my garage. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know we have an inflatable paint booth that we're not using here. The epoxy is the glue to bare metal. You need epoxy, or you need a self-etching primer for bare metal. Primers don't stick to it, but the key here it's just to make a base adhesion, nothing else. So I'm not worried about the dust kicking up and all the sand coming out of the car. That would be the least of our worries.
Our 783 Challenger and epoxy primer. Now we go ahead, we don't have to worry about rusting, we can touch it. I will say, when epoxy priming it, don't worry about runs. It doesn't have to be the prettiest thing. You do have to go back through and rework all this. This is just to save the metal that we're keeping. We do also have some sand that came out of all these little cracks you saw when we turned it out. That's the bad thing about sandblasting. No matter how good you clean initially, if you're going to paint the same day, it's going to get sand in it. Again, not super worried about. We're going to go through. All this area will be scuffed up, especially since we have to apply anything on top of the epoxy. Since the epoxy says it's 3 days, I think, max before you can apply to it. But yeah, at this point, we got everything cleaned up that we're keeping. I'm going to go ahead on the rotisserie and weld in a couple small patches and frame rails. There's a couple holes I want to weld up. And we're going to do those repairs underneath the car that I can't get to. Besides that, I mean, we still have, you see the quarter panels on the car and all the other stuff. I haven't cut anything off the car. The reason being, I'm not a fan of building these cars on the rotisserie. I know some are. Me, I've seen too many of these things even go on lifts, convertibles, or ones that are kind of in rough shape, where you'll see these door gaps moving just when the lift lifts them up and down. So I imagine what you think when you got two pieces at both ends of the car pushing each other, and to me, it's not 100% straight and everything, so you're gonna want to bow the car. This is not the time to cut anything off the car. So I know we're not keeping these quarter panels, but we're not gonna cut them off until we actually put them on the frame jig. Saying that, the frame jig, we're gonna go ahead and start building that. That's gonna be on the next video for this car. I know we're going to model the frame jig after the 71 Barracuda you've seen on other videos. It's got a straight clip. It's never been wrecked. And I know it's a different back half, but the front of the car should be exactly the same. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. I got some ideas, because everything on the front of this car, you could see even the cowl panels bent right here from the wreck. This car took such a hit that I can't trust anything forward of this firewall. And then once we build the front of that car, I have the frame measurements for the car. We'll go ahead and string the back and make sure nothing's bent that way. The good thing is, it did fit on the rotisserie straight, the rotisserie that was the Barracuda was on. So I have high hopes that the back's at least in good shape, that the front was a little bit harder to come on, but it's not trying to bind the car up or anything. So that's the car. Well, like I said, we're in epoxy. We got some of the parts today, so let's go over some of the parts we're going to install. Some are back order, and I'll go over that and show you what's upcoming for this car. So it should be pretty exciting. So let's check them out. All right, so here's the parts we got from AMD. I always like to unload them. The rollback is the easiest way to do it, where I got a flat table. I'm mostly looking for dents and dings, major stuff that's going to be inefficient to fix on exterior panels, and then make sure none of these, like this is the cross member in the front, make sure it's not bent or warped or anything. Usually AMD is really good at it, but we got the cross member, we got the front balance here, we got the front fender, which I'm really excited to try. I've never had one of these Challenger fenders. I'm really excited to try out the quality. We did get the whole front frame rail, and here's a shock tower for the frame rail. It came with the kit. We didn't quite need that. We also have the Stage 2 front chassis kit, which consists of the radiator support, the upper cowl to fender brackets, and then underneath the subframe connectors, along with the front and rear torque boxes. I got 4 door hinges for the car. I usually, anything, if I'm doing panel alignment, my opinion, you can't align a panel off a hinge that's old, because it's going to change every time you close a door. So I won't do one of these unless we get new hinges or we can rebuild them. We got the rear trunk floor, the full front trunk floor, full floor pan, the full trunk floor, rear trunk extensions. I bought the trunk gutters for both sides. We are going to put 2 quarter panels on it. As of right now, we can't get the 2 quarter panels. They're back ordered along with the front right fender. We are also ordering one of those. When we went through the fenders on this thing, they matched the quarter panels. There had to be a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch of Bondo down the whole thing of them. There were signs of it, but once we really got looking, it is the same thing. Whoever did this car just smeared the exterior in putty. We got the front fender apron, rear balance, the rear toe pans, and the gas tank strap. So this should get us going on this car for the next couple months. It's a lot to install. Stay with it. We're going to try to video all of it. I know we've done some of this on the 73 Challenger over there, or 72 Challenger over there. So we might not go in depth as far as the floor pans and things like that, but the stuff that we haven't installed yet, I'll make sure I stick with those. The other stuff, we might just do a quick highlight reel of, hey, we're putting it in there. So stay with us. This will be a fun project, and we'll see where it takes us. If you like the videos, comment, subscribe, like them. Just help us get the word out if you know other Mopar people.